Dober dan vse skupaj. Za nekatere dobro jutro, za druge je dan že krepko čez. Dobrodošli na današnjem srečanju, na današnjem webinarju, ki bo predvsem govoril o novih trendih, novih smereh, participatornosti in audience development. Z nami imamo strokovnjakinjo Alessandra Gariboldi. And from here, I will switch to English. Hello, everyone. And Alessandra, thank you for joining us. And thank you for taking your time to be with us and to show us the immense work of audience development and of the work that you are doing so successfully in the last decades. But before we start, I will ask my friend Tina to read the curriculum of Alessandra to know better who is our speaker.
Hello. Well, Alessandra Gariboldi is senior researcher and consultant in the fields of visitor studies and cultural project evaluation, with a primary focus on audience development and participatory approaches. She's head of transnational projects of Fondazione Fitzcarraldo and collaborates with the Cultural Observatory of Piedmont in Italy. She's been involved as researcher and trainer in several EU-funded projects focused on cultural participation as ADESTE, Audience Developer Skills and Training in Europe, Connect, Connecting Audiences, and Be Spectative. And she is now project coordinator of ADESTE Plus. She developed the 2 years capacity building program in AD for the European Capital of Culture, Rijeka 2020.
Thank you very much. So my internet is a little unstable. I don't know how is yours and how you are listening to one another. I suggest that if you cannot hear us, that you all shut down your video in order just to listen what Alessandra is going to tell us. And after, when we finish, I think we can reappear again and start asking questions. Alessandra, is this okay for you?
Okay, no problem. I understand the connection issues. Anyway, I'll be looking at my slides as I present. Okay. But then afterwards, I'd really love to see you face to face.
We will be
some reactions.
We will be for sure back. Maybe it's just my connection, but for safe reasons, I don't know how it is in Slovenia, but I think it's better to be sure. Alessandra, please, the floor is yours, and we are really very happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kaya, for inviting me. What my bio doesn't say is that I am an art historian, so I do come from museums, actually. This was my first love, my first space of work, and also as an educator and evaluating educational programs. So basically, this is a coming back home for me. When I can work with museums, I'm always really glad to. As you will see, the project that I will, whose results I will present you, might be interesting maybe for you, although it was tested especially, not only, but mainly in theaters in his first round of testing, let's say, but also in few museums, especially in the second round and in a very important museum in the first round, which is the Gulbenkian Foundation in Portugal, the museum of the Gulbenkian Foundation. Because Gulbenkian Foundation has many other, let's say, cultural structures within the same umbrella. I will share my screen just to show you a little bit. The presentation will be more or less, let's say, half an hour, 20 minutes. I will try to keep it so that we can have really room for discussion, because it's as such is I think what is more relevant also for us and interesting is to have you as let's say also critical friends by reacting, not just asking. So one of the principles of the project is that no one is teaching anything. The partnership was made of different kind of partners. So we were research partners like Fondazione Fitzcarraldo and many others. So the Audience Agency, the Center for Kunst und Intercultur in Denmark, Melting Pro Learning from Italy, Mapa des Ideias from Portugal, and Cultura Nova Foundation from Croatia. So we basically put together research partners that have been working for years around the topics of cultural participation and in supporting both policymakers and cultural organizations in developing meaningful relationships with their communities, and artistic partners. So those who were actually doing the hard work in the field, just like you do, who were like keen to test on themselves a different way of working, let's say, trying to achieve through this more meaningful, deeper relationships with audiences, their actual or their potential audiences. Many of them have been working with people they didn't used to work with, for example. And among them, there was, as I was mentioning, the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, but also the Teatro Stabile Torino and Mercury Theatre, so huge theaters, I mean, big or small theaters, and one community arts center, which is also interesting because they are completely different as a kind of organization. So these two kind of partners exchanged a lot. So basically we were not like consultant going and giving people within the arts organizations the recipes to build better relationships, but we developed together a process. Of course, we started with something, but we tested it together and it was nourished by everybody to get to somehow a model of intervention that could be replicated with others. And the third kind of partners we had were policy partners, because we realized that, and we know very well that cultural participation is a really major challenge, it's quite complex, and there is no one way to tackle it. So we need also to have policy frames that support cultural organizations in taking risks, developing programs, and somehow helping them going towards a more meaningful cultural participation and relevance given to their context. So this said, was the structure of the project as such. Our, let's say, starting point was since the beginning that placing audience at the center of cultural organizations was our aim. As the Engage Audiences study showed a few years ago, that we were leading with other partners across Europe for the European Commission, if you don't assume within the very heart of the museum mission that you want to be for that people, it doesn't happen. So one of the biggest issues within the cultural sector is that the part of the activities among the many that an institution does, including, of course, preserving, researching, exhibiting, and whatever, the part that is related to the actual relationship with citizens is usually, let's say, aside. Less important is, and you can easily see it in the mirrored in the budget structures. So educational programs or outreach programs are always, let's say, the last part that happens at the end of the process of planning a museum year or an exhibition or whatever. So as a general rule, one of the issues is that we always think, and this, let's say, budget structure also reflects the idea that dealing with audiences is just the end of your job. It's just something, it comes at the end, let's say, as a final step. It's a work for specialists, so only few are not only able but interested in doing it. And this is what makes feeling that the idea of developing audiences is because you have to develop them because they need to, poor guys, whether they like it or not, by the way, but that you don't have to change in order to do so. While we know by research and experience extensively, one which is now a matter of fact, that if we don't change as cultural organizations, we will not be able to reach more people, more diverse in a more meaningful way. So the issue is that we know that it's not about developing audiences, but by developing cultural organizations. This, I think, is a strong statement as such. Apparently is quite commonly shared, but it's a statement because it says, and it acknowledges that the problem is not in the people out there, it's in us, in our responsibility, in our capacity to reach them, in our capacity to be meaningful and relevant, in what we offer to them as a space for reflection, as a space for learning, as a space for also, I mean, debate, why not? So that is kind of a shift that is happening across the cultural sector, not just in museums, since years. So I'm sure that being part of ICOM, you know very well that this is not new debate. I mean, this is really part of. So what we tried to do with our project was to find a way to overcome the barriers to audience development success, because we well know that everybody is doing amazing stuff, especially educational programs, but not only. In many museums across Europe and beyond, doing incredible creative and I would say also intense work and meaningful work with all kinds of audiences. The problem is that all these experiences are short-term, are always project-based, are quite rarely, if not never, part of the structural activities of institutions. So they are just aside. They came on top, as just exposed, you know, afterwards. And as all projects, you have budget, it starts, it ends, and then that's all. No one is taking charge of the relationship that maybe an educator worked for 1 hour to build that relationship, for example, or to, let's say, lower the barrier, the access barrier for people who were never attending, for example. So this was the first barrier that actually prevents audience development practices to become not only mainstream, but also in the long term and in a wider sense effective. Then there are silos practices. Actually, the way of working within cultural organizations, also in the very little ones, not necessarily in the very big ones, not to mention them, of course, are actually done in silos. So programming is not curating, which is not educating, which is not communicating, which is not marketing or promotion. They are somehow silos in practice. They don't used to work together. And it's quite unlikely that educators are involved since the beginning, for example, in the design of an exhibition with curators, for example. These silos practices are a problem in many sense, and are definitely a barrier to audience development success, because they are somehow telling people that this is a job for educators or a job for communicators. So if the exhibition doesn't sell, it's because the communicator made something wrong, or because educators were not skilled enough or focused enough or usually funded enough. But it's always someone else's guilt if someone doesn't work, because it's only their responsibility. It's never a responsibility assumed by the whole organization. Then our work, even the best one, is often, very often based on stereotypes. So another issue is that we don't use to work with real people. We work with the idea we have in our mind of what people want, what people are, what do they need, what do they understand, where do they actually are, where can I find them? And this is because we don't empathize. So even when we are very good and we have data, which is already, I mean, not so common, quality data to use, we usually don't look at the people beyond those data, beyond and behind those data. So breaking those stereotypes means that you need to actually talk to people and become more relational in the way you design. Then, of course, cultural organizations, museums particularly, are quite risk adverse. So technically, usually very low funded, so they need to not to make the wrong thing. So an exhibition must be a success. Every test and attempt must be a success. So we don't want to change the way we do things usually. And this happens everywhere, not just in the museum or in the cultural sector. People don't like change. It's because it makes you uncomfortable, and taking risks is not that natural. And more than all, when we talk about people, we have the fear of losing control on the quality of content. So artistic quality, if we have to produce something, or quality of the content of the scientific relevance and correctness, I would say, of contents. So allowing people to have their say doesn't mean that everybody can say whatever they want, of course. So they can't deny scientific knowledge, which is, of course, the disciplinary specific of museums, for example. Often curators within museums are the best experts ever in the world of the collection they have. So they spend years studying it, and they don't want to have someone telling them that that's not the value of their collection, or that they can be discussed in different ways, or so on. So this is not a solution, but let's say what we tried to do to overcome those barriers through the project was to, first of all, empower change makers within the organizations. So the people we were working with were not just one change maker within the organization, but they were always cross-cutting teams of different people coming from different departments, which is also our way to make diverse, to overcome the silos practices. So we put together technicians, curators, educators, marketers, communication managers, front-end staff, whatever, promotion staff, all together, artists sometimes, working together in designing for audiences, specific programs for audiences. This was because we wanted to, let's say, overcome the idea that it's just one, let's say, one shot. So you're just doing one project and that's all. And that someone had to stay as a legacy within the structure, within the organizational structure. So change maker and diverse teams. Since they are based on stereotypes, we tried to work a lot on developing empathy through empathy tools and exercises and approaches, so facilitated ones. We worked with prototypes to execute in fast and cheap iterations, so that the risk taken through a single prototype in action was very little, manageable, let's say, because it was somehow something you could do without spending much money or any, without having to convince everybody that this was an amazing thing beforehand, investing a lot of resources in something that maybe in the end goes wrong. And then, of course, about the fears of losing control, this is not something that you can somehow fix. This is just something that you can manage. So having open debates around that. So be openly discuss what is at risk when we allow people to have their say somehow. So our challenge as a project was to develop a methodology for this transformative audience-focused work. So a work with audiences, for audiences, made by diverse team within the organizations that was able both to, let's say, reach effectively those audiences, but especially to transform the way cultural organizations were working within their, among them. So within their staff, within their walls. So actually we developed a model, basically, prototyping this methodology, largely based on design thinking, as I will show you later. We tested it with our artistic partners that then developed diverse different audience development programs at the end of this process, with each of them different, of course. So diverse teams within each institution. Then we refined the model thanks to what we learned through the process, what worked, what didn't, what was missing. We refined it and tested it again with other organizations across Europe, dozens of organizations actually, of different size, of different kind, because we wanted to see what as a process could work everywhere, regardless size and cultural context. So it should have been, let's say, a process able to adapt and adjust to each context, which are extremely different in terms of cultural context, and also organizational cultures, for example. And then we organized 3 summer schools and 3 European conferences and promoted 3 policy forums to discuss policy. The last conference is going to take place next week in Turin, and it will also be open online. So I invite you to join it. I will also recall this later. So based on these principles, what we did was developing this ACE methodology, audience-centered experience design. I hated the name, by the way, but in the end, this was. I'm just a project coordinator, just to say, of this project. It's not just me and Fondazione Fitzcarraldo. We are leading partner, but we are 15 as a whole. So just to say that I'm representing something much bigger. Why we choose design thinking? Design thinking is kind of mainstream, it's buzzword, everybody's using. It comes from the startup sector, it's always from the business sector, and then it comes to the cultural sector and cultural management sector. But what we thought it was interesting of design thinking is that it's a strongly relational process, because for the way it is designed, it implies that you never design something for someone without actually having an exchange and listening to them. So you don't assume, we don't make assumptions through this process. We test it, we validate it continuously with the people we pretend to design for. It's strongly creative as such, because it's putting diverse people together. It really unleashes a lot of potential in terms of ideation. So creativity is a very key point, especially for people within organizations which are not used at all at using creativity or to be valued for their creativity. While, I mean, you can be creative in so many ways, and this is really strong dimension. It's diverse because, of course, it's made of diverse people doing this. Diversity is key in creating good design processes. Through prototype, it lowers risk, and through prototyping and the whole process, it embeds learning in every and each step. So you can't come across each step of the thing without having learned so much, because it's a reflective process as such. And this is what it was why we decided to use this approach in designing. We already had done a lot of job in this area with many others approaches, planning of all kind, which we think are relevant still, but we realized that they were never able actually to make people work together in a reflective and creative way. So it wasn't actually transformative as such. So all management tools were not able, are quite useful, but they are not able as such to let's say, unlock the creativity and that is needed, and the risk-taking attitude that is needed in order to innovate with the way we work. So basically, all design thinking processes, I don't know if you know about it, but all design thinking processes basically are articulated along 4 or 5 steps. And these are basically framing a problem, whatever it is, then trying to understand who this problem is about. So who is touched by this problem, what, empathizing with them just to see, oh, wow, I thought that a family had this issue, but they have a completely different issue. I thought that migrants had this issue, but they have completely different issues. So it helps you empathize, going and checking in with people, what their priority and needs and barriers. Then you converge into this central step and decide and focus better the challenge that you have, which is to designing something for someone which is not just an idea, but a very concrete person with some features and characteristics and needs. And then once again, you reopen the process, creating many different solutions, even the silly ones, basically brainstorming and ideating. And then based on some criteria, you converge again at this stage, and you decide what's the idea you want to test and prototype. Then you do a prototype, which is a very little experiment, a minimum viable product is called in the business sector, that allows you to understand if what you were meaning, if the needs that you were addressing, the way you're addressing it is actually true. So it's a way to validate. And this is a win-win process, because you never lose, you always learn. And it's an iterative process, because it's supposed to start again after what you have been learning. So you go refining the idea in these little steps. So this is basically design thinking. You can find plenty of theory and approaches and many schemes like these, many others. But this is the essentials of the process that we wanted to test and the value we saw in the process. Of course, it wasn't the only one. because we also know very well that the cultural context is not a business or a startup. The cultural context is complex. So we also had to refer a lot to the organizational innovation theory, particularly the Lewin's 3-step model that says that in a situation, you're always restraining change. So you have to go balancing unfreezing moment with freezing moment when the new normality is achieved. So we also use, let's say, this theoretical background. So basically, this is the process. For each step you see, basically the gray you see is the usual design thinking process. What we really worked a lot on was the unfreeze part. So how to align the organization on their priorities, come into relations with audiences, and then on the embedding phase, which is for us reiterating the test, because of course this shouldn't be just a project, but a way of working that should last, hopefully. What is interesting of the process is that all the process is quite relational in the sense that it works on both levels. You never stop working with audiences, and you never stop working within the organization. In the end, it seems difficult, but it's just, let's say, a series of workshops made with these groups of staff, 6 or 7, depending on the situations, through which they went somehow first aligning the team, then empathizing with the audience that you want to reach, then define which is exactly the target audience and the question you want to find a solution to, and then ideating and getting to the prototype. So as such, it's an interesting process, but what is more relevant to us is that it's diverse. So it's really context related as a process, as all journeys. It depends on who is traveling from where and to where. So all our artistic partners, and you can see them here, developed quite different things, very different things and solutions from each other, because they were different organizations with different identities, values, missions, production processes, cultural context and social context. So the process was absolutely different for everyone. In the case of Teatro Stabile, Lorenzo Barello, they developed, consider the pandemic was in the middle of such, and it was quite helpful because, I mean, they were forced to this process. Also, those who were not so keen to within their organizations. But these are our change makers. And they, for example, developed, ended up by developing not just a project which is not that relevant with their audience, but they developed a, they created a new function. So they changed the functions within the structure, the organizational structure of the theater. It's one of the major theaters in Italy. It's one of the public funded ones. And they just created a new function as engagement function, cross-cutting and, let's say, over all the functions that used to be production, programming, communication, marketing, education, whatever. So the change was quite, in a sense, lasting, hopefully. Mercury Theatre developed a way of working, which is now their way of working. So they never assume about their audience anything. They always go out and test. Arinera reached, they were the community center. They reached incredible results with youngsters who were absolutely outside their target audiences. And those youngsters created several arts programs, and they were amazing. So there are several videos also showing this. At the Mercury, at the Norebro Theatre, they developed an, let's say, kind of a journey through the shows. So now everybody from the light technician to the programmers and curators and artistic directors, they are all involved in designing solutions around their shows so that they are actually engaging, able to speak to the specific audience they want to talk to, according to the kind of show they set up, which is something they never did before. They developed a new language, a new vocabulary that they are using, and also new tools, an audience canvas that they use internally to define what's the responsibility of everyone in reaching that audience within a cultural program or a show or whatever. And the Gulbenkian Museum developed an incredibly ambitious program with youngsters, especially because they were, Susana Gomez da Silva, she is the head of education of the museum. And one of their biggest issues was that they couldn't work with the music department or the garden, the historical garden departments. They were not just simply working together, never. And so they decided that they realized that they had the same issue with youngsters again, and decided to focus on that audience and to develop something together. And I encourage you to look at the presentations she gave to NEMO, which is available online on the NEMO website, because it's quite interesting, and she explains very well. There is also a very interesting video of what they realized that is explaining quite well what's the kind of change they went through this program. And Catarina Majuran from Rijeka, they also developed, it was quite hard for them. It's a huge national theater. So we are talking about opera, ballet, 2 theater companies, and 300 people more or less. So it was quite hard in that case, for example, but they succeeded in open up, let's say, a true space for exchange and reflection with their audiences. So this is more or less, this is Imagina, the project of Gulbenkian that I left you here, but then I will embed you the link so you can reach the videos, which was the one I thought you could have been more interested in, since they are a museum actually. So they started from the same kind of cultural environment and production system and anthropology that you come from. So that's all. This is our final conference that will be next week. Oh my God, next week on 10, 11, and 12 of November. There is still some places to attend in presence in case you would like to come to Turin. We would be extremely glad, but you can attend the morning sessions that will be also streamed, also online. So you just have to record on the website and you will attend the final event. That will hopefully be something also, let's say, I stop. Okay. So I hope I didn't take too much time to present the process, because of course for us it's a very long work and it's quite complicated and complex and rich, and it's always difficult to reduce it in a meaningful summary. So I hope I gave them more or less the feeling of what it is about. And the blueprint, which is the model, let's say, as now is website. So you will be able now from November to go and reach on the website of the blueprint, which is telling for each step, how does it work, tools that we used, case studies and reflections of also the barriers that might occur in each step, the resistance from participants, for example, or from the institutions, or some difficulties, and how they, those who have experienced, have overcome, let's say, those barriers. So there will be a lot to work upon, hopefully. So we hope we really made something useful for others. The idea is that this is something, of course, completely available to anyone, to be also further developed and challenged.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you very much. Now it's time for questions. I know how shy we are, so I invite you all, if you have questions to start, you can raise your hand. I will go through and try to find if there is someone raising his hand.
Tina is raising.
Tina is raising. Okay, thank you. Tina?
Have you had any feedback from the policymakers? You mentioned that you included policymakers in your model. They participated in structuring that model. Have you?
Of course.
Feedback from the other?
Yeah, I don't hear you very well, but I understand that the question is about the policy side of the project. The policy side of the project actually was quite hard to push forward because one of the partners basically left this part and just concentrated on the other, and it was our main partner in this. So for us, it was quite interesting to, let's say, gather different policymakers across Europe in different conversations, rounds of conversations we had. And we basically realized that, of course, for example, they liked the model, but the issue for us of having a policy forum here was about analyzing the barriers to effective audience development policies. So which are the policies that could help and push and frame really cultural institutions towards a more democratic approach to cultural participation. And we came up with a series, they were quite contributive, I have to say, although in the midst of the pandemic, the issue suddenly became how to make accessible with digital, how to make visible culture as a policy area among the other policy areas that were, of course, considered much more relevant. So we just changed a little bit, but in the end, we came up with some recommendations, which are not just recommendations. I would say are more, let's say, express barriers, and also with some idea of how those barriers can be overcome because someone did it, actually. Mm-hmm. So changing the funding schemes, for example, Cultura Nova Foundation did it for their beneficiaries in Croatia. And this, in a way, was a game changer, because in a policy frame that changed the way they were funding, they supported this kind of process. That it wasn't just like in the UK policy, for example, for just you must have an audience development plan. Okay, that's a good thing. But in the end, what did you do with that audience development plan? Usually nothing. So what, for example, Cultura Nova introduced in their funding schemes was, okay, you need to be trained to audience development and participatory practices. And this is how we will give you the money. So you have to upskill yourself in this area if you want to have access to funding that pretend to be useful for the enlarged community and not just for you and your survival, let's say. So funding schemes like this, or funding schemes that were, for example, trying to overcome the output-led frame of projects, which usually are supporting the idea of creating a specific output. So I'll give you money if you produce an exhibition or that exit or that whatever, or that show or whatever, that tried on the other way to stress the process instead of the outputs. So if you want to work with participatory practices, for example, you must give up control on the results. You can't know what will happen. You can't, just simply you can't. So that's, you need policy frames supporting you in taking this risk, for example, and not asking you implicitly that you have to produce a specific output. So these kind of things. So these are the things that we will be discussing the last day of the conference.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
I have a question. What do you think were the most problematic barriers to go through? You're working in a team, but how do you reach within the team the same goals? Because sometimes we understand the same words completely differently.
Basically, the work is precisely this. So what we work in within the workshops in the preparatory phase is to align in the team. So what we work on is to, let's say, unveil expectations, go to purpose and motivations of people, which often are quite close in the sense that they really and sincerely want and aim to have happier people, more engaged, more able to understand their contents, more able to be critical, more able to, so once in the end, in the very deep of the art of any cultural professional, which is, true cultural professionals, I would say, that is worth in this name, is really to change the things they see outside, is to really have an impact on something. So shifting this perspective since the beginning from what you want to do from what you want to make happen. So an impact-oriented approach really helps align teams. What is often happening is that, of course, the teams were created, let's say, in the lab. So the director choose and pick people based on the criteria we gave them, of course. So we want them diverse, we want them with different ages from different departments. So we try to give some guidelines, but in the end, they are picked by the director. And sometimes the director was part of the process. For example, in the Norrebro, the director, Mette Wolf, was there all the time. She never missed one meeting. She was there with her colleagues, and she accepted in a way to be put at the same level with the others, which is not a given. In other cases, directors, we didn't see them, barely. But we created the conditions so that we had the embed, let's say, the endorsement of the director at each step. So the group work, teamwork should go to the director to discuss the results and the further development every time we met. So between one workshop and the other, there were homeworks that included, I mean, the working with the leadership, for example.
Yeah, and I think that is also very important. Any other questions? With Tina and Maya, can see someone raising its hand. It would be no. Okay.
No one, but
So,
I have one more question.
go.
What is the future of this project? Do you plan to do a follow-up in a few years, or?
Yeah, so let's say, yeah, we would, yeah. Thank you for the question. I'm not sure. Yes, of course, we won't let it go just because Adeste Plus is the result of two previous long-term projects, the Adeste of the 2012 and Connect, with different partners that went growing actually. So we got to a critical size at the moment, because we realized that we were touching upon a real need of the sector and of many, many professionals who were motivated by the same ambitions we had. So they were a lot isolated or working on their own way. So through participatory practices, through the arts, through whatever, so in different ways, through digital. But we realized over time, and now there are really literally hundreds, and maybe thousands of people who were involved at some point by one of these projects or by all of them sometimes. So we've got a feeling now that we are sitting on gold. So we have a huge community of professionals, motivated, skilled, in positions sometimes of responsibility, so they can also make a change somehow within their context. All, let's say, gathered around the idea of willing to do something not just for themselves and their institutions, but for the others as well. So that is the feeling we have at the moment. So we think we will go further. We will try to find another funding scheme for pushing forward this legacy, because at the moment it's a huge legacy. Anyway, we will be managing the Blueprint website for a couple of years for sure, but even more possibly if we can find sustainability for it, to, let's say, keep also receiving inputs and feedbacks by others, because as I was saying, we didn't invent design thinking. Many were already using it, and many were already using it in museums, for example, or in the cultural sector. So it's not just an invention. We didn't invent hot water. What we tried to do is to find meaningful and useful ways in which we can give tools and means to those who are willing to go towards that direction, to know that they are not alone. There's a way to do it, and you can have a source of inspiration for doing that. So that's basically our understanding. So hopefully, yes, I mean, all of us are quite motivated since we began. In a way, it's 10 years now, and in my whole transnational life was basically crossing these projects and building upon the next one. So I hope this will not, and it's not just me, as I was saying, we are many. So
okay, so good luck.
Thank you. Hope you will be following.
Thank you.
Any other questions? let us wait a moment or two if there are any others. If not, I think that they can still mail you. We can give them the contact. Yeah. And of course, they are invited, anyone to follow the Torino conference.
Of course, we'll be glad.
I, in the name of ICOM Slovenia and all the colleagues, and ICOM CE, who is also joining us today, wish you all the best. I know that it's almost at the end of the project, but we know that these projects at the end are not done to be finished, but to continue with other projects in the next years. Hope also to one day that you will be able to come to Slovenia and have a proper lecture with us, because we still think that the contact is the best thing that can happen, and culture is universal, and we need to see one another and to discuss it face to face. Thank you very much, Alessandra. Thank you for everything what you have shared with us.
Thank you so much. I will ask you just a second. So I know that you are all hidden behind your camera, and I know that it's not easy at all, and I don't like that to call people to react at any cost, because I know it's not that easy and not everybody feels comfortable with that. But please really do write me for feedbacks of any kind. Also to tell me something terrible like it sucks. I don't know, just to say that it's these moments for us are quite important also in terms of a project, because we are just taking the temperature of the reactions of the sector. So if this resonates at some level with others, which are the doubts, the cultural sector, we deal with complex issues, and the idea of tackling complex issues through simple tools is kind of a Anglo-Saxon thing that we don't, as a Mediterranean, I mean, we don't love that much. So acknowledging that complexity is there, and but still is a conversation that we need to have, and particularly in this time of so hard sustainability for all of us. So in a way, for us, it's really important to have those feedbacks in terms of really temperature. It's not just like or dislike, but you made me think, you didn't make me think, I still don't like the idea. I don't think we should change. For example, it's not my problem if audience is not coming, it's their problem. Things like that. So you can do it anonymously, so I won't know who's telling me. But really for us, it's really important. Also, please join the conference. There will be some room also there for interaction and make questions. And for us, it's really important, particularly in these really hard times where we can't meet. We are quite excited because in 2 weeks we are going to meet physically, and we didn't meet since 2 years now with all our partners. So it will be quite emotional on the other hand. So feedbacks are crucial. Otherwise, we don't learn anything, and we keep saying ourselves how good we are, which is useless for everybody, basically for us. So thank you so much for any feedback you will want to give me.
Torej, pišite. Hvala. Now I will switch to Slovene. In vidimo se čez 2 tedna z novim webinarjem, ko se nam bo pridružila Martina Lemanova, ICOM Češka, oziroma ena izmed vodij, če že ne glavna vodja, Prage 2022, kjer vam bomo dejansko povedali veliko več o kongresu, ki prihaja. Hvala, thank you and have a nice day. Lep dan želim vsem.
Hvala. Hvala lepo.